we're ready to open the hearing on Senate Bill number 154. Sponsor is Senator Lewis, and Senator Lewis, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Dave Lewis, I represent Senate District 42, which I always like to explain goes from the Yellowstone County line south of Lavina to the Missoula County line west of Ovando. So I have exposure all the way across the state. It's really, really fun. Mr. Chairman, committee members, let me kind of run through how I got to where I am today with this issue. I started about, well, really almost 2 years ago, right after the session, taking a look at this because in Lewis and Clark County, it was quite obvious that we had an industry that was really exploding in size, and I was concerned about, the fact that I didn't know much about it. I figured the public didn't know very much about it, and I also was convinced that, look, this is a business. It deserves to be treated as a business. They are operating legally under the terms of the measure that was approved by the voters back in 2004, and so whether you like it or don't like it, it's here. It's a big business. There are something over 30,000 people who have the 28,000 patients and 4,000 caregivers who have cards. There are like 4,800 growers right now, and I don't have any evidence to back this up other than discussions with people who are part of the industry, but we think there are about 15,000 people who work part-time and full-time in the business. This is a big industry. One of the witnesses on a bill here earlier, I think maybe last week, suggested it might be $1 billion industry. I think that I can't quite figure that one out because I think that's beyond what makes sense to me, but I would certainly suggest it's several $100 million industry in told. And again, it's grown up so quickly that people just really aren't aware of it. So, Mr. Chairman, I started out with the idea that I wanted a real strict regulating process. I want to know how much is grown. I want to know where it goes. I want some records kept of the distribution of it so that we have an ability to make sure that, in fact, it's going to the people who have the right to use it in the form of the cards that are issued. The process in Senate Bill 154 was basically aimed at the growers, and the reason for that was that I was ignorant of about half of the industry. I understood the growing end of it. I understood the possibility of assessing your tax or fee at the grower portion of it, and my thought was, well, then it just goes out the door and everything will be fine. The more I learned about it, and in fact, just in the last 3 weeks, I've really kind of had an opportunity to dig into it. There's a huge distribution system tied in this part of the industry, probably, in fact, more people involved in that than in the actual grower portion of the industry. In that this bill, 154, as presented to you, was pretty much silent on the issue of the distribution system. The rest of the bill, the main portion of the bill, I guess, or one of the major portions of the bill, was that I assessed or suggested that there be assessed a gross sales tax at the grower level on the product. And that bothered me because I'm not really into carrying tax bills, but that was the one way I could figure out to come up with the money to pay for the regulation and some of the other things I wanted to do with the bill. Well, when the Department of Revenue came back, between the Department of Revenue and Department of Health and Public Services, they wanted about 45 people to administer the tax system, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. So what I'm going to do, and I think it's been distributed or about to be distributed, we have been working diligently over the last few weeks to try and come up with a melding of the bill that came over Representative Sand's bill, House Bill 68, which was the bill that was prepared by the interim committee, and then the bill that I brought forward in the form of Senate Bill 154. What, in effect, I'm having handed out right now is a Greybill, because I think the committee had in mind sitting down with all the bills that were coming into the committee and trying to put something together. And I think what we've done is make a step forward with that. The Greybill basically puts a lot of the measures from Senate Bill 60 or from House Bill 68 together with what I have in Senate Bill 154 to address the missing part of 154, which is talking about the distribution system. So I'm going to again, I think, spend most of my time going through the measure that's just been put before you, which would be the amended version of Senate Bill 154. Again, if the committee decides they want to go with another bill, I think I'm more concerned about getting the concept and the issues out there. But what we have done here is go through, and one of the things that was an issue was they wanted to use the word cannabis instead of marijuana, and it was like whatever as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, a lot of the changes that you go through simply address that. We go through a lot of the definitional things that I didn't have in the original bill that define precisely what a provider is, and again gets into the issue that was missing. We get into some pretty specific language on who's a resident, and that's over on the section 13, I think it is. I'm looking at it here. We lay out the specifics on what the retail process is and how it should be approved and what it does. They address in here now the whole issue of medibles and sundries and those types of things, which are a big part of the industry, which I learned as I was working on it, that people who take the product, convert it into food product or convert it into salve or convert it into various other variations of the product, they are part of the industry, an important part of the industry, and they needed to be addressed by this. We've got some pretty good definitions of what the product is and what parts of the product they are. We stick with, in this draft, we kind of changed it a little bit, but I want to stick with the current possession allowance, the 1 ounce in possession being the allowance. This one tightened that up a little bit and said, I think 1 ounce per week. I think that's difficult to administer. So anyway, we'd be talking about sticking with that. There's a whole issue on parents growing for minors. There are very few number of minors who have the ability to use this card, but there has to be some recognition of the fact there would be parents who would be involved in growing and providing product to their minor children, as small a group that there are. Again, lots of definitional expansion over the original bill to try and address some of the issues that were brought up in House Bill 68. Let's see. We have language in here on what can be done with out-of-state patients, and basically where we're at right now, that the licensing authority could in fact make exceptions to provide product of an out-of-state patient, as it was described to me in talking to the providers, that they have people who come particularly from Wyoming who have serious medical conditions, who live in northern Wyoming, and so we wanted to at least have an opportunity for them to work with the licensing authority and get permission to come into Montana to purchase medical cannabis. We put some limitations on what the growers can grow, as far as, again, we stick with the 6 plants per patient that was in the original measure. The Section 7 in the middle part of the bill talks about the allowable activities of the providers and prohibitions on what the providers can do. Again, this addresses the whole issue of the provider portion of the industry that was missing from Senate Bill 154 as it stands now. We have Section 8, a recognition that there need to be testing facilities. There are several facilities in the state that work with the industry to test the product, to determine what the purity is, what the genetic makeup is, that type of thing, and they need to have the authority to acquire and test the product. The infused product manufacturing, that's the Section 9, talks again about a portion of the industry that I didn't understand even existed when I started in this, but it's an important part of the industry that you can possess, deliver, transfer, transport cannabis and turn it into the infused products, and that are very useful for some of the folks who use it for medical purposes, because not everyone wants to smoke it, or they need to acquire the product they use in other ways. We again are talking about what you can do and not do in Section 10 in the retail outlet. We need definition, good definition on the retail outlet, on the premises license and requirements in Section 11. We go on through in Section 12, the licensing process. The licensing process is pretty much what was in Senate Bill 154, which was just taken from the liquor licensing process. My thought was that, having gone through several of these incidents in my district where there is a need, for instance, or a request to open a new tavern in a particular area, and we've got a 70-year-old licensing process the Department of Revenue has worked on determining how to handle those requests, to give the public an opportunity to be heard, to give local governments an opportunity to participate in the process. And so we're basically just using that licensing process for the establishment of people who work in this particular industry, as far as the retail outlet or the growing activity as well. There are provision in Section 17 to suspend licenses. The license, again, would be required of everybody who's involved in the industry. They have to be able to, or have to be willing to come in and get licensed and provide then reports and to the Department of Revenue, because I'm still working with the Department of Revenue because they've got the experience on the liquor licensing process. I bailed out on the gross receipts tax because of the cost of the administration. I thought the chances of selling to this legislature a tax, number one, were difficult. Number two, a tax that required 45 people to administer it kind of made that a very tough sell. So we could drop back to a license fee structure, which is very similar to the House Bill 68 structure that came over from the department, or from the interim committee. Some differences, but again, proposals that would allow us to use fees and would make us somewhat able to work with the bill that came over from the interim committee. We talk about the authority of the local governments to regulate, the authority of local governments to adopt ordinances, that there would be a grandfathering protection for existing businesses. That, again, to look at the bill, we set up a special revenue account. We're still proposing, I had proposed to put 50% to local governments. We would have a smaller amount that would be, the fee structure we're looking at here is going to be something like $4 to $5 million a year. And so we'd be distributing perhaps close to $1 million to local governments, maybe $1 million to the Department of Revenue over the year, $500,000 to $1 million. I haven't got an estimate from them on what they'd want to administer the licensing process. But then I still have a kind of a different twist in here where I'd like to have about $3 million of this tax go into providing support for senior citizen programs. And people look at me like, well, what's the nexus there? I guess I'm on the Budget Committee. I've been on the Public Health and Human Services Budget Committee for as long as I'd like to remember. And one of the problems we've got is that the area agencies on aging, we're about $3 million short of being able to fund them for a year. I was going to propose that a portion of the fee be set aside to help maintain those agencies, which are so critical, particularly in rural counties. I guess I go back, one of the counties I represent is Mark County, which is in particular White Sulphur Springs, lots of senior citizens. The Senior Citizen Center is critical to those small towns, and I'm still amazed by the fact that Mark County passed the medical marijuana measure by something over 70%. That's the most conservative county I have of the six that I represent, which is usually good for a good solid 85% Republican vote, and almost something over 70% approved this. And I talked to people over to in 2004, after it was approved, and said, my goodness, why did we get such a huge vote in Mark County on this? And it was the senior citizens who support the use of medical cannabis, who understand the needs for it if they get terminal illnesses or very tough illnesses. They have to work with chemotherapy, that type of thing. And so, again, that was part of the reason I recall that support, and also from my budget experience, know that there's a terrific need there to support those activities. So, Mr. Chairman, I know this is a bit irregular to come in with a gray bill, I guess, on the part of the sponsor, but I know that there has been a lot of interest on the part of this committee and other people in the legislature to meld the best parts of House Bill 68 and the best parts of Senate Bill 154 and perhaps some of the other bills that are floating around and try and come up with something that we can build a consensus around. Mr. Chairman, I think you'll hear from the proponents today that we may in fact be there. I think in general, most people who are involved in this large growing industry think we're just about in the right spot with the proposal that we're making now in the form of the amendments to 154 that are included in this gray bill. Mr. Chairman, will be available for questions. Certainly like the right to close, and I know there are a lot of witnesses here, and I hope that everyone is respective of the committee's time and their testimony, because it's a busy time of the year. So I'm just asking that folks be very brief, as before the chairman also asked that.
Senator Lewis, I have a question for you first here. What is the source of the substitute bill?
Mr. Chairman, one of the witnesses will come forward. This was a person who works in the industry, was the one who brought it to me. I'm not sure who the drafters were. I spent quite a bit of time in the last 4 or 5 days going through it. Mr. Gingrey, who will be a witness here, was the one who furnished it to me and has, in fact, been the person who went through the explanations and has kind of set himself up as the person who is proposing this. And I, in going through it, think that it brings in all of the major issues that I was concerned about. So, and I'm getting an effort to try and help the committee in their deliberations. Thought it might be best just to present that at this point, so you have that to talk about and consider. Thank you.
I think what we're going to need to do, because it is not an official legislative document, is to pretty much confine your testimonies to the introduced bill. The discussion piece that Senator Lewis passed out certainly can come in handy to the committee as we get into executive action and trying to come out with a program on medical marijuana. But right now it is not an official document, so it really isn't appropriate to be using it as the substance of your testimony. With that, time-wise, folks, I'd like to be able to close the committee hearing at least by 12 o'clock. And if we could then pursue that route and say that from this point we'll allow up to 45 minutes for proponent testimony, which would take us to 25 to 11. Then we'll take 45 minutes for opponent testimony, which would take us until, like 20 after 11. Then we'd have some time for committee questions and the closing by the sponsor, and that'll take us up to about noon, I'm pretty sure. With that, let's call on the first proponent.